back. It's Metalia again. I'm sorry for the amateurish looking display of books that I have behind, because I thought the background's just a little bit plain. I just came back from class, so that's why I'm dressed a little bit like this. So today's topic will be dealing with a philosopher called Aristotle from the 4th century in Greece. So I thought of actually displaying some books because they're somewhat related to Aristotle or the history of philosophy. So Aristotle was originally a student of Plato, but he broke off. He his relations with Plato strained, and he found an academy, and he spent a bit of time tutoring one of the famous warriors in Greece called Alexander the Great. So he served as a tutor. So Aristotle was a close observer, or with detail. So his persona, he's really observant with the things around him, with material things, because he used to work as a dissector of animals. He's a biologist, and he proposed the idea that the metaphysical could be understood from the physical. And of course, there are modernists or modern politicians or philosophers, theologians who actually adopt some of his theories. But as for today, we will be talking more about Aristotle's proposition on the hierarchy of being and what he thinks of the soul, and Aristotle's theory of causation. So, to begin, I'll list the 3 different types of psyche that Aristotle proposed. So the first type of psyche listed in the hierarchy of being is the nutritive psyche. So nutritive psyche isn't necessarily the top of the hierarchy, but it's part of that tripartite hierarchy. Nutritive simply means the psyche related to plants. Plants, they have this inner, I wouldn't say instinct, but well, if you'd like to call it instinct, they have this inner instinct for them to photosynthesize, to transform light and solar energy for growth. So if you study biology, I'm sure that you guys probably are familiar with the 2 different veins, the 2 types of stems in the plant. It's the xylem and the phloem. So the xylem is designated for transporting water all across the plant, and phloem for food. So before I actually continue, I'm just gonna redefine the term psyche. So psyche, not psyche, Psyche. It means an animated soul. So Aristotle here is saying that the plants are actually still part of the animated psyche, the part of the animated soul. And I'll talk more about that later. So the second hierarchy of being is comprised of the animal psyche. So Aristotle proposed that the animal psyche is comprised of a higher level of life than plants. It contains this drive for self-locomotion, or the response to instincts. And that response to instincts is comprised of, building a higher sense of community, nourishing their offspring, and actually finding or discovering their sense of belonging. But it's not just that. I mean, that's sort of like the lofty aspect of it. But to actually describe it in more detail, it's just a simple example as saying like a rabbit. A rabbit actually has the instinct of knowing which rabbit hole they will go to, because they're full their sense of instinct is triggered by their senses of smell, touch. Animals sniff. They sniff not just for a reason. They sniff. They sniff because it is a way for them to carve and discover where they belong, and to actually sort of retrieve something that they've lost, for example. So for example, if dogs if the mother of a dog cannot find where her offspring is, she would sniff the ground, and she would actually track where the child is based on that sense of smell alone. So that's part of the animal psyche that Aristotle talked about. And the third is the human rational psyche. So the human rational, of course, allows humans to construct advanced systems, like systems in the mind, and it helps distinguish right or wrong, or rationality in that sense. But Aristotle also talked about human rationality in the sense that it allows ourselves to actually have that autonomy to form a spiritual connection with the divine world. So theologians like Thomas Aquinas, who was inspired by Aristotle, that's one of his books, his selected writings, he derived the idea, specifically from natural law and the divine law, where he proposed Aristotle's idea that through natural law, human beings can work through and towards the common good, to obey the divine law, in a sense. So the divine law actually commends the sort of sets of duties that we as human beings, divine duties, are supposed to follow. But in another way, we are also trying to carve a path for us within this earthly system, to carve a path towards to respond to the natural law, but also to respond to God, to fulfill his calling. But I'll just clarify that once again, that Aristotle vaguely mentioned the word spiritual, but he never actually mentioned God in this sense. So there's three hierarchy of being: the nutritive psyche, the animal psyche, and the human rational psyche are part of the hallmark of Christian anthropology. So Christian anthropology means what it is to be a human person in God's eyes, and what our role is to be human. What is our dignity? Where is it derived from? It's derived from God. So, the idea of spiritual connection and rational, it sounds human, but Aristotle never really talked about the idea that there is a divine spark within the human person. He's not like Plato, who strongly believed that we can unlock this inner God within us so that we can fulfill our duty as humans to do good, to live a virtuous life, to live a non-concupiscible spirit, or the spirit that can be controlled with controlled and balanced desires and thoughts. So Aristotle was saying here that one cannot actually just simply say the word spiritual or talk about how to be spiritual without referencing religion. And, actually touching upon a completely different topic, I'll start talking about the theory of causation. The theory of causation is derived from Aristotle, once again, but influenced Thomas Aquinas. So, the theory of causation is divided into 4 parts. The first part is the formal cause. The second is the material cause. The third is the efficient cause. And the fourth is the final cause. So the formal cause proposes questions like what an object is. It seeks identification. It describes the character of an object. So for example, I'll show this as an example. This is Aristotle's book. And what is it? Well, it's a book. And the second question is the material cause. So the material cause proposes the question of what something is comprised of. What is it made of? Oh, okay, so this is a book. It's made of paper, cardboard, and it's binded together with glue. And the third cause proposes question which says, where does this object come from? Who or what produced this object? So who actually produced books? Oh, well, editors compiled this book, but bookbinders, factories where people actually work together and bind together all these different pages, book editing companies, book publishing companies. And number 4 is the final cause. What is it for? It's to educate people. It's to give insight to people who are interested in the works of Aristotle, mostly students, teachers, scholars, or anybody really who's interested. Doesn't matter. So this is important. This is important in Christian or theological anthropology because it describes the whole essence of the book. So if you remember, I talked a bit when I was talking about Plato, I was emphasizing more on the fact that the world of the spirit, the world of the forms or the unchanging is the reality, and the world of the material is somewhat inferior and just comprised of shadows, vague representations of the actual form. But Aristotle's conception of the true essence of a being is more about what is comprised within, for example, me. For example, what am I comprised of? What is comprised of a human being like me? Is it just my skin, my blood, my red blood cells, my hair? What am I comprised of? It is comprised of the whole observable being. So Aristotle really emphasized this. This is the core aspect of his teaching, where if anything can be observed, then it is living and it has an autonomy. But of course, not all objects have autonomy. He's talking specifically more about animated or living objects, not books. So this has, like I said before, this has quite a bit to do with theological anthropology, how it actually relates to the human person, and how it relates to human rationality as well. Like, what are purposes? Aristotle talks a lot about virtue, in a way that we're designed as humans to maximize our capacity as humans or our skills. So, for example, a teacher maximizes his skill as a teacher in teaching people, in the power of in understanding language, understanding some literacy skills, and the ability to communicate that to his students. Whereas a pianist would portray his potential, portray his virtue or excellence, and maximize that by improving his piano skills. So Aristotle proposed the whole sum of this is from the hierarchy of being and the theory of causation. Aristotle proposed that virtue has to do with doing what you're meant to do. So the animal, the plant's human rationale, and whatever that's being composed of these different entities, physical entities, they're meant to achieve excellence, whether that be moral excellence or physical excellence. That's part of Aristotle's teaching. But of course, it has its flaws. And without going too far on this, Aristotle assumes that all objects would always act in accordance to their nature, in accordance to their physicality. He never questioned that whether or not the methods to achieving that moral excellence would actually be comprised of good methods. Maybe somebody, for example, I was once a really poor working class person, for example, and then somehow, by the course of fate, I turned into an incredibly rich millionaire. But if the method is by me stealing and actually engaging in fraudulence, stealing people's money or hacking people's bank accounts and actually obtain money from there, then that actually explains the flaw of Aristotle's concept of the excellence, the virtue of excellence, because it doesn't really explain so much about sin, so much about human morale. Even though he said earlier that we are as rational beings can distinguish right or wrong, he never really emphasized so much on sin. He has never emphasized how sin could weaken or undermine human nature or virtue. Because for Plato, you see, the difference is that Plato thinks that virtue doesn't have anything to do with sin. It doesn't have much to do with the consistency of your goodness, in a way. So yeah, that's all I can say for now. Let me know what you think. I'm not actually Aristotle. I said I like Aristotle in the sense that he's being a bit logical, but he's a little bit controversial in that sense where he never really talks so much about sin. Although, of course, theologians like Thomas Aquinas tend to say that the divine law is what proposes, is what rules at the top of the hierarchy and looking down into the world of sinners. So he never actually touched upon Aristotle in that sense. But yeah, I'm sorry if that's a bit vague, but I tried to communicate that as well as I could. And let me know what you think. Peace out.